Have you ever noticed how some connections begin with intensity, promise, and emotion, yet end before they ever reach depth? What if the reason certain women move from one relationship to another has less to do with choice and more to do with what their nervous system is trying to protect? Today, we're not talking about blame or labels. We're talking about the hidden psychological patterns that quietly shape attraction, attachment, and emotional escape. Many women move from one relationship to another because relationships become their primary system for emotional regulation rather than emotional connection. When internal stability is underdeveloped, emotional balance is outsourced to romantic partners. In the early stages of a relationship, attention, validation, and emotional availability create a sense of safety that calms anxiety and fills internal gaps. This relief is often mistaken for love, but psychologically it functions more like emotional anesthesia. As long as the relationship provides reassurance, consistency, and affirmation, the nervous system remains regulated. However, when conflict arises, communication weakens, or emotional responsiveness changes, the sense of safety collapses. Instead of interpreting discomfort as a normal phase of relational growth, the mind experiences it as emotional threat. The body reacts first, triggering anxiety, restlessness, and fear of instability, and the mind follows by searching for immediate relief. Rather than learning to self-soothe or emotionally process tension, the individual seeks another connection where emotional calm can be restored quickly. This creates a repeating cycle in which relationships are not built to deepen, but to stabilize emotions temporarily. Over time, the tolerance for discomfort decreases, making it harder to remain present when challenges appear. Emotional maturity requires the ability to sit with unease without escaping it, but when that skill is absent, movement feels safer than repair. The pattern becomes automatic. Attraction rises when emotional needs are met and collapses when those needs are threatened. This is why some women leave relationships that still contain care, compatibility, and potential. The departure is not driven by lack of feeling but by emotional overload. Without internal emotional regulation, even minor relational stress can feel overwhelming. The nervous system prioritizes relief over long-term connection, and novelty becomes a shortcut to emotional calm. New relationships offer predictability in a different form, not because the partner is better, but because expectations have not yet formed. There is no emotional history to manage, no unresolved conflict to confront, and no vulnerability built deep enough to trigger fear. This absence of emotional weight feels like freedom, but it is actually avoidance. Over time, this coping mechanism prevents emotional growth, reinforcing the belief that peace only exists in beginnings rather than continuity. Until emotional regulation becomes an internal process rather than an external dependency, relationships will continue to function as emotional crutches rather than conscious choices, repeating the same pattern under different names and faces. Attachment conditioning plays a powerful role in shaping how intimacy is experienced and interpreted in adulthood, especially when emotional intensity becomes confused with genuine connection. Many women who move quickly from one relationship to another are not chasing variety, but familiarity with a specific emotional pattern learned early in life. When attachment experiences are inconsistent, emotionally unpredictable, or unstable, the nervous system adapts by becoming hyper, alert to emotional shifts. In adulthood, this sensitivity often manifests as attraction to relationships that feel emotionally charged, uncertain, or intense. These dynamics stimulate the nervous system in ways that feel familiar, even when they are unhealthy. The early phase of such relationships, is marked by heightened emotion, anticipation, and psychological arousal, which the mind interprets as chemistry or passion. However, this intensity is often rooted in anxiety rather than intimacy. As a relationship stabilizes and emotional predictability increases, the nervous system no longer receives the same stimulation. What should feel safe instead feels dull or emotionally flat. The absence of emotional volatility is misinterpreted as a loss of connection rather than a sign of security. This creates internal confusion, where calmness feels like disinterest and stability feels like emotional absence. As a result, the individual begins to emotionally disengage, believing the relationship is no longer fulfilling. The desire for a new partner emerges not from dissatisfaction with the person, but from discomfort with emotional steadiness. This pattern reinforces the belief that love must be intense to be real, and that peace indicates emotional decline. Over time, this conditioning prevents the development of deeper intimacy, which requires consistency, vulnerability, and emotional patience. Intimacy grows through shared experiences, conflict resolution, and emotional presence, not through constant stimulation. However, when intensity is mistaken for depth, relationships are abandoned before they mature. Each new connection restarts the cycle, offering temporary emotional excitement without long-term security. The individual becomes skilled at beginnings but unfamiliar with continuation. Emotional tolerance for predictability remains low, and the nervous system remains conditioned to seek highs rather than safety. Without awareness and healing of these attachment patterns, emotional attraction continues to be driven by anxiety rather than alignment, creating a repetitive loop where relationships feel exciting at first but unsustainable over time. For some women, moving from one relationship to another is deeply connected to identity formation and the fear that emerges when intimacy becomes emotionally exposing. When a stable sense of self has not been fully developed, relationships begin to function as mirrors rather than partnerships. Each partner reflects a different version of who the woman believes she could be, offering feelings of worth, desirability, protection, or empowerment. Instead of cultivating these qualities internally, they are temporarily accessed through connection with another person. As long as the relationship reinforces a desired self-image, it feels meaningful. When that reflection weakens, the emotional attachment begins to dissolve, not because affection disappears, but because the relationship no longer supports identity stability. This creates a pattern where partners are unconsciously chosen for the emotional roles they fulfill rather than for mutual compatibility. Over time, the reliance on external validation prevents the development of an internally anchored identity, making separation feel necessary whenever self-doubt resurfaces. At the same time, deep intimacy introduces a different psychological threat. As emotional closeness increases, so does the risk of being fully seen. Intimacy exposes unresolved insecurities, emotional wounds, and fears of rejection that have often been carefully hidden. For someone who equates vulnerability with danger, closeness triggers anxiety rather than comfort. The mind begins to associate emotional depth with potential loss, judgment, or abandonment. Leaving the relationship before that exposure occurs becomes a form of emotional self-protection. Ending the connection provides a sense of control and preserves self-image, even though it disrupts emotional continuity. This behavior is often misinterpreted as independence or emotional detachment, but psychologically it reflects avoidance. The individual is not rejecting connection, but the risk that comes with it. By repeatedly restarting relationships, emotional investment is kept shallow enough to feel manageable. The illusion of freedom masks a deeper fear of being emotionally known. Without confronting these internal conflicts, relationships remain transitional rather than transformative. Identity continues to be shaped through others rather than within, and intimacy remains something to approach but never fully inhabit, reinforcing a cycle where movement feels safer than emotional presence. The truth is, people don't leave relationships because they stop feeling something. They leave when staying requires emotional skills they were never taught to develop. When awareness replaces judgment, patterns begin to dissolve. And once emotional safety is built internally, relationships stop being places to hide and start becoming places to grow.